Faker, the star player of SK Telecom, is many things to League of Legends and within the game. But he's also more than I feel like sometimes people even truly are able to realize or conceptualize in terms of his context in esports and League of Legends. So first and foremost, yeah, he's the star player of SK Telecom. He's the primary star player carry of the greatest League of Legends team of all time. He's the best League of Legends mid laner of all time. He's the best League of Legends player of all time. And here's the part where I feel like I kind of leave people behind, is that I think he's actually the greatest League of Legends player it's even possible there ever will be. And so in that sense, he's not just an outlier, even among mid laners, among players, among great players, but he's the biggest possible outlier. He's literally like a once-in-a-generation level talent, not just League of Legends talent, esports level talent. Like, he's really up there with some of those names in other esports games who just transcend the game because their talent level is so incredible that you feel like no matter what type of game they play or what type of scene they're in or how many other great players there are, they would have been the greatest no matter what. So I'm thinking of names like Flash from Brood War, where he was the only guy who achieved like 70% win rates in every single matchup. He had no weak matchup whatsoever. He won the most titles. He repeatedly he was the best in team play and in individual play. He literally mastered the whole game eventually. He was the only person to ever, at his peak, be the best in every possible respect of the game. Whereas the other great players, yes, they were great. They were gods. There was a pantheon of gods before Flash where they were great at this, but maybe this one matchup was slightly weaker, or they had one opponent who always got slightly the better of them, or they were great in individual play but not in team play. In the same sense, you have a player Cypher in Quake Live, 1v1 and going back into Quake 3. He mastered two games that were, yes, they were similar, but they had slight differences. Quake 3 was a lot more fast-paced, a lot more fluid. The game lasted longer. Quake Live was a little bit more defensively based, had different kind of rocket values, etc. But he became the god of both. And he had this incredible record where he could beat every single player in his key points in time and dominate almost every type of map and had no weak area. We had Neo in 1.6, eventually just became the most complete player, could do everything, could even AWP, Rifle God, play every map, every TT position, all different T situations, just the greatest player. And yet he's hard carrying one of the teams that actually lacked for some talent at times. Now what's it unique, I'm putting them in this kind of pantheon here, I'm putting Faker in there. In League of Legends, there just never was a player like this. So, let's contrast him against some players in history who were the best in the world at one point in time. So I'll pick out a name from history, A great example would be Wei Xiao. Now, Wei Xiao, when he was the best, so end of Season 2 going to early Season 3, he was seemed like the perfect AD carry. So for an AD carry, he had everything you could want. He'd mastered every area. He had a very deep champion pool. There were certain champions he was just the best on. And then beyond that, you could go, wow, for an AD carry player, he's just perfect. But at the same time, there were still other players in other roles who were gods who you could look at as well. So you could look at Froggen as a mid laner, was incredibly complete, also was at one point the best player in the world previous to Wei Xiao. You could look at Madlife, this godlike support, this incredible playmaking that no other support could even dream of or visualize or conceptualize as even being possible. He was doing these things game to game and carrying a weak AD carry, but making his team one of the best in the world, making all these finals in a row. You could look at Diamond Prox, who just constantly reinvented the meta, constantly changed which champions were viable, forced certain bans against himself, revolutionized how certain champions were even played or even thought of in terms of their role within the game. Were they even viable? Could they be used? Could they be overpowered in terms of how he eventually showed us how to use them? You could look at top laners. We had people like Reaper when he was shot calling and hard carrying OGN championships, MLG championships, IEM championships. Then you go to players like Shy, the ultimate team fighting top laner, just an absolute god, but incredible at laning as well. Then along came Flame. The point is, in all these eras, even if there was a best player or a perfect player at that position, they were part of a pantheon of gods. There were other great players, and there would be others at other positions who were comparable. And actually, the debate then became, well, which position do you prefer, and which position do you think, and what kind of impact do they have on their team, and how do we define best right now? Are they most effective? Is their play having the most impact? Are they the best individual skill-wise? But there was always slight things missing from all these players, like minor areas. In Faker's sense, like I say, he's not just the best mid laner. He's not just the best player. He's just the best so far it's possible to imagine or conceive of. And the reason why I keep stressing that aspect is because that didn't have to be the case. He could have just come along and been the best mid laner and the best LoL player, and that would be enough. And he could even be the greatest LoL player, and that still wouldn't be what I'm saying. It's not just that he's the greatest LoL player, it's that his perfection in so many areas, his mastery of so many different areas of the game, that usually even great and godlike players only have, say, 2 or 3 of these qualities are the best, but then this one's like an okay quality, this is like a mild weakness, but it's covered up by the style of play. Faker has nearly, if you're doing rankings of like levels on each possible aspect of the game of League of Legends and being a pro player and an impact carry player, Faker would be, if not a 10 in every category, like at worst an 8, if not a 9 in every single category possible, like laning, team fighting, matchups, champion pool, understanding of how to outplay people, how to create plays, playmaking. Obviously not shot calling. I guess that's one. Actually, that's maybe the one area you could take it down. But that isn't usually how we judge most players. Usually, shot calling is a separate area. But you see the point: longevity, consistency, performance ability, clutch play, ability to rise to expectations. Any aspect you could come with, he's just topping it out. And so the point is, he didn't have to exist. There could have been this really great player who was awesome in these areas and on certain champions, and then he had periods where he was just okay, or he had times when he didn't have the right teammates, and so he looked bad, or he had times when other players came up who had more in certain areas and made him look bad. This really hasn't happened in Faker's career. And so, to me, I always stress that point to people who are from other games from esports when I talk to them and they ask me about League. Some of them know a little bit, and I'll tell them, like, guys, you've got to watch Faker. Like, even if you're into League at all, so you know some of the basic context, I'm not saying you've got to watch him as in, like, he's the best player right now. Like, oh, he's really tearing it up, like, say, Zest was in StarCraft 2, or in CSGO most recently, like Kenny S was really on fire. It's not like that, where this is a guy on fire for a few months and at the moment he's the best we can imagine and he's doing incredible things. I say to them, listen, if you, like most people in esports, I agree, LoL has this lower skill cap, and as a result, you have this natural feeling, like it's hard to know if even the best LoL players would be as good as some of the gods from like a Counter-Strike, a Quake, a StarCraft Brood War, these games that had a higher skill cap and more possibilities to show off what a godlike player you are. But I say to them, that's where you have to realize Faker is different. Like, Faker really is a talent on the level of any of those great players from the games that have the higher skill cap. And even though millions and millions and millions of players play these games, he didn't have to exist. There could have been gods who weren't him and who were just lesser, but still, because he wouldn't have existed, seemed like the best ever. Like, to this day, Wei Zhao would be considered like in the running for best player ever. Madlife would be up there, Mata would be up there, Dade would be up there, but the problem is they're not, because Faker exists, so none of them can go to the level of Faker. None of them can max him in all these categories I've kind of laid out there. So let's talk about who Faker is and the things that make him so special. So let's just start with accomplishments. It's kind of fitting that the greatest player ever has some of the greatest accomplishments ever. So he has 3 OGN titles, 2 of them back-to-back, something which has never been done before. Even people who've won 2 OGN titles have never done it back-to-back, but he did it. He was the first to do so. When we say he has 3 OGN titles, you have to add in that, yeah, he didn't play in the final of the last OGN, the spring split. But, I mean, the team was destroyed so easily by, like, Easy Hoon and those other guys that I guess you could use some logic, like the CJ match was the real final and he was the carry player there who really did save their asses, and he just wasn't even required in the final. So it's hard to count as a full OGN title, but it sort of does as well. I mean, there's players who've won OGN titles before who you'd say are OGN champions who did less, like maybe they weren't the primary carry in every game they played. He's a player who's had the perfect season, 15-0 for SK Telecom in the winter season of 2013. He's a world champion. He's won literally the most prestigious tournament it's possible to win. He won the All-Stars tournament even when his team was in theory in their worst slump and they were at their worst period and it was the worst meta for him. He still dominated that tournament, showed up every single great mid laner then. There were a lot of good players there. You had like Expeke, Shi Young at the time was the MVP of the Korean League, the Chinese League rather. You had a bunch of really good players. Now, what makes him such a special player, though, beyond just, these are just accomplishments. You have to look at the context of those anyway to know how great they are. Well, let's just start as an individual player. In terms of mechanics, it's not enough to say he has great mechanics. It's not enough to say he has the best mechanics. He is nearly mechanically perfect. Now, obviously, no one will ever actually be mechanically perfect. Like, they'll miss CS, they will accidentally cancel an auto attack. Everyone will do that. The difference is most people will do it on a fairly regular basis. Faker's level of consistently high level, near perfect mechanical play is unparalleled in League of Legends history. I mean, I've looked at other players who had really fluid mechanics. I'm thinking of like Name in his prime, thinking of Wei Xiao, Froggen, Flame. These players looked mechanically perfect, but even they haven't banged out this many games in a row where they could just be mechanically unreal. I mean, he's mechanically near perfect. The fluidity of his mechanics, they're not only the highest level of mechanics, but they're so fluid. It just looks so effortless. Like this flow, one thing flows from one to another. It's not awkwardly moving from this to this to this. The sheer level of precision involved in it. I mean, you don't have to be mechanically perfect in that sense. Like, Insec, in some ways, can be better mechanically on certain champions than Dandy can. But Dandy's very fluid. The difference is Faker is fluid, and he's precise, and he's the best mechanically, all wrapped up into one. Now, in terms of laning, this guy's a lane god. Not just because he understands how to lane in an incredible fashion. Like, he has an absolutely unparalleled understanding of level difference changes, like when you can force a fight when the opponent doesn't think there necessarily is one to happen even there. Power spikes and how to abuse them. Specific matchups. No one has this understanding of how to play specific champions against others like this guy does. It's like a library inside his mind. Like a, what would you call it? Like just a database of how every matchup even predictively could be played and has been played in the past, and therefore what edges to look for. All of this adds up to make him an impossibly good 1v1 player, and part of his 1v1 brilliance is this kind of calculating yet opportunistic aggressive play. So when there is an opening available, he not only somehow instantly recognizes that it exists, but he's opportunistic in the sense that he will just, without hesitation, pounce and take that moment and force this play. And it's not even that an opportunity is available as in it's presented. Like, you see a window and he's like, should I go in now? It's like when he can visualize it's even possible there is a window of opportunity here, he will act, make it happen. And the other player, sometimes, even these great God-level mid-lane players in Korea and other regions, it's the reason why it's so shocking that the play occurs is that until the play's initiated and they start to see what's unfolding, sometimes they didn't even know a play was possible here. They might be under their tower, they might be near the base, they might have just moved out of range, they might have actually gotten the first ability off on him and think, right, well, I'm going to outplay him now. Like, remember when Nagne from KT Rolster landed the charm on Faker's Victor and got him like down to 2/3 health to near a half health, and Faker still did all of his abilities perfectly to completely outplay Nagne and get the kill. This is an example of where he just knows when it's possible to make a play, or he can visualize what the possibilities of the champion are, the limitations that exist, and then abuse the max level of it to just make plays that no other player can even imagine. So in this sense, when we say calculating, that's why I then add opportunistic, because it's not that it's calculating as in he literally in his brain's thinking, right, I can do this now, and then I'll do that, and then I'll do that. I don't even feel like he has conscious understanding of it as it goes. He's even said that he's not as much calculating as instinctual. So in this sense, that's what it's more like. It's more like in-game intelligence, in-game calculation on kind of an unconscious, subconscious level. So in that respect, if we use this term from basketball, okay, they say like basketball IQ, and the idea is a guy in real life who's actually not a very intelligent guy, like Dennis Rodman, had an incredibly high basketball IQ, like understanding of where the rebound would be, how to outlet to people, how to defend certain players, to cut off their hard, difficult angles. So in game, he had a very, very high basketball IQ. Now Faker, it's true, in real life he does seem to be quite an intelligent guy, quite a unique guy. You can tell from just his demeanor and the way he talks, he is kind of a bit of an alien, a bit different from the rest of us. But in game, he has the highest in-game intelligence I've ever seen from any player. Or at least he displays it. The highest in-game IQ in terms of understanding of how to make a play, what play is possible, how to execute the play, what plays to chain together, because some of these he can't be knowing what the enemy's going to do in response. So he's making these decisions. Decision point, do it. The enemy does something. Another decision point, acts on it. Another decision point, acts on it. And that's why when you get these plays where he does 3 or 4 things and chains a full combo of all the abilities, but zones a guy into the next ability and gets the kill at the end in a scenario where you think he's going to die and he should die and he's versus a very good player on their champion. That's why in such a scenario, it looks like almost like it had to be calculated. Like, how could he know that this was going to come next? He doesn't, but he's so good, and his practice level is so good, and his mind for the game is so keyed in. His in-game IQ is so high that it looks as if it was calculated, but actually it's instinctual. That's what makes it even more incredible than it already is. I mean, I would compare him in this sense to some of the great players from other games. So in StarCraft Brood War, a game with a very high micro APM mechanical aspect as well as the strategy. So you would have to micro these units within a big army to force the outcome of a fight. Well, there was a player, Bisu, the Protoss player, who probably had the best mechanics ever for a Protoss player. And he was phenomenal at both multitasking, like being able to do multiple things at once, like farm. Well, it's not called farming there. It's just called mining, building units, getting armies, like getting troops to come, the cavalry or whatever you'd call them, replacements to come out to the army while still fighting with this army, posturing, waiting for the enemy, maybe doing harassment. He could do all these things at once to a degree no other Protoss player could, and arguably no other player in history could. But also his specific small micro was absolutely incredible. Well, I've seen interviews where he said that in these moments where he was at his peak, like dodging everything, perfectly microing, getting absolutely the most out of these units, and doing the mining and building more units, when he was doing all of this at once, it just felt like a rhythm, kind of a flow, kind of a zone he would get into, but he wasn't consciously thinking of it. He even used to say, like, my hands felt like they were moving so fast. And the whole point is he's trained himself and his talents to the level that they can almost just be unlocked instantly from, if he can imagine something in his mind, his hands just make it happen. It's not like he thinks then, and I have to do this, and then I'm going to do that. It just happens, and then his instinctual ability to play the game is unparalleled in the sense of Brood War, in that very specific sense. That's what Faker's skills are like. There's also another quality that it reminds me of from Brood War, which is in Brood War, the greatest players ever had this thing that we used to term star sense. Like, they just had a sense for when an enemy is going to attack them, or how an enemy would attack them, even though they might have no vision of the enemy. They might might not have even had any vision of what build path the enemy was on, and therefore what unit likely could attack them now. But they had some sort of special sense, like a spider sense that Spider-Man has, that this is going to happen now. And so their ability to react to these things and then to cause the outplay is just it's not even imaginable. Until you see it happen, you can't believe it's possible. And that's another defining quality of Faker's career that he is above and beyond anyone in history of, which is ability to outplay the opponent. So we were talking before about visualizing that it's even possible to make a play, then making the play, then executing everything. What about when someone makes a play onto him and then he somehow adapts and predicts what they're going to do, sometimes before they truly have predicted what they're going to do next, but he just senses that this would be the correct play for them to do, and then forces an absolute outplay where he has to be even more incredible, and yet does so and destroys them completely. And we look and we go, oh god, how could you even play versus Faker? He has a near perfect understanding of the limitation of certain champions, where he's took them to the highest level, and of other champions, a very good, very quick, sort of intuitive sense of what the limitations of the champions are, and then versus other champions. Like I said, the matchup, his understanding of how to play versus other champions is unparalleled. Now, you want to talk about champions. This is an area where no one can compare to him in history. Even the roles like top lane, jungle, which have wide pools in history of champions that are available, and the great players, some of them are meta resistant and can move through them. No one has the mastery of champions that Faker has. His champion pool is the biggest ever in history of any role, of any player, but his mastery of specific champions is unreal. I mean, first and foremost, let's just talk about champions in terms of mastery, like champions that he's the best at, he's the best to ever play at. Okay, so we'll start with the obvious one, Zed. Everyone remembers the Ryu outplay. He's the best Zed ever. He's never lost on Zed as far as I know. We've had a lot of great Zed players when Zed was OP, especially like in Europe. We had people like Ryu in Korea. Players who were really great Zed players. Goon, no one could actually compare to Faker's Zed. He just took that champion, which had so many playmaking opportunities and could be so dangerous with that assassination potential there, capacity, and he just took it to a level no one else could ever go to. His Zed, absolutely superlative. The best ever, for certain. So, okay, another assassin, LeBlanc. We know he lost that one game now, and even in his one game he lost, he did everything he possibly could do. Just an unbelievable player. I remember there was a game against, I think it was Jin Air in Masters of 2014, where he actually gets totally behind on LeBlanc. He was down like 1-4 or something. He'd actually been getting like beat up a little bit in lane, and he still made all the key plays. He made like a triple kill that then led to SK getting the Baron, and they came back and they were able to win this game off it. Just his LeBlanc, again, like the Zed player, when there's all these possibilities to use all your abilities to the max and to limitations that a lot of other players, even good players, won't fully understand, no one can really compare to what he can do on this champion. The best ever. So, okay, we've got Riven. As far as I know, his Riven's still undefeated. No one has ever been able to consistently get that kind of flawless animation cancelling an ability to get all the combo out and auto attacks as Faker has. He's been able to just do plays that are unreal in this champion. It's not surprising that he's so good at it. But then here's what's funny. You go beyond that, and there's other champions he's probably the best ever on that now you're not even starting to think of as so obvious. So an obvious one would be Ari, because he was very, very spectacular with it. It's very rare that he will make true misplays with Ari, and he can just combo that champion to the max, and obviously isn't even that strong anymore compared to its peak at Season 3 Worlds. But then let's go to some other ones. Gragas. He hasn't had to play it that much. It was mainly at the end of 2013, obviously. But okay, I'll credit that Ryu was a very good Gragas as well. But Faker, the level of plays he could make using all of the kit was also utterly incredible. He's at least tied for best Gragas player, if not best Gragas player. Let's keep going. How about Ezreal? The way he plays mid Ezreal, using the ultimate to help people who are 1v1ing in other lanes, or having a team fight and help turn that, or to just trim the wave and push waves in. It's just a level of control that he can have within mid Ezreal that no one else really compares with. There are other great mid Ezreal players who are great at the outplays and very, very spectacular players. Obviously, we have names like Dade, Coco, but I don't know if anyone's truly as great as his Ezreal, even though he hasn't had to use it that much. Now then, let's think now. I haven't even gotten to the champion, which he is definitely the best ever on, and is his most winningest champion ever. After 26 games of Orianna, Faker won 65% of those games. That's his most played champion and the one with the most wins on. Now, Orianna, you think of names immediately, don't you? You think of, obviously, Toys, when he was exceptional with it at Season 2 Worlds and pretty much won the tournament off the back of his performance on that. No one is as good as Faker's Orianna. His control play, his aggressive Orianna, his ability to land the shockwave time and time again at the flawless aspect while kiting out and not being able to be attacked, yet getting those auto attacks in. He's just an absolutely flawless, incredible player. Obviously using the utility aspects of Orianna to protect players like Piglet or impact whoever's going into the fight, allow them to get even more impact on the game itself. I mean, there's a whole bunch of players there. What have I done there? Like Zed, Orianna, LeBlanc, Ari, Gragas, Ezreal, Riven. That's at least 7 that he's the best ever on. I mean, I don't know who else is going to... There's no other players going to be any category where they're the best ever on 7, where they really played them as well, not just played them like once and then they went out the meta. We're talking about real champions. And these are champions where other players were picking them in their heights and at different periods of time. And there have even been other almost one-trick pony great players on them, but none can compare to Faker here. So, okay, there's the mastery of champions. But okay, let's talk more about mastery. Then you go to champions where he's always able in every single meta to find champions he can be very good on. It doesn't matter what the meta changes, he'll find champions he can be good on. So think more recently of the last season. He became very good on Lissandra. Cassiopeia, yes, EasyHoon's very, very good on it. Yes, guys like Pawn were able to show off their ability on it at MSI, but Faker became an incredible Cassiopeia player. He showed it in solo queue, but then also in real games, he was able to use that champion and be an absolute beast on it. Then you think of someone like Victor. Yeah, he's part of the reason why Victor became that OP for those couple of weeks, and his ability to use it was absolutely unreal. He was just a beast on this immediately. It's not like he had a bunch of games built up, just immediately unreal on Victor. This is like a modern meta, and yet again he's finding champions that he's among the best on, if not the best on. Now let's look at champions. Remember, we've already got 7 there, then I've added 3 more there. We've got up to 10 champions now. Now let's talk about champions that we don't even associate with him in general. Like, people wouldn't remember him playing them, or they don't think, oh yeah, that's an obvious Faker champion. Let's start with Nidalee, one of the champions he played right in his debut, and he's been playing through to, I guess it would just mainly be 2013 was when Nidalee was around, but early 2014 Nidalee was there as well. Over 12 professional games on Nidalee, Faker has a KDA of 10.7. And that's just out of this world. There were other great Nidalee players. Ambition was very good. We can think of many players like who used it and abused it at its peak. Goon was good on it, but none really to this level. How about TF? You don't think of him as a TF player. You think of Dade, maybe even Pawn in modern day. Obviously Messiah. Faker has a 6-1 record on TF. Playmaking champion, obviously. Syndra, again, not something you think of as a Faker champion. Obviously, he had that great play in this season where he landed all those balls on the guys. It was absolutely insane. But I think that might have been Najin. I can't exactly remember. But he's 5-1 on Syndra. How about Yasuo? There's another Dade champion. Another champion that someone like Pawn would play. He's 5-1 on Yasuo as well. So we're adding in more. What was that? Nidalee, TF, Syndra, Yasuo. Right, we're up to like 14 champions now that he's mastered or is very good on, or on 7 of them is the best. And then you add in stuff that he only, in general, played in solo queue. Like he played once or twice at most in professional, but mainly with just solo queue. And on solo queue, there's absolutely unreal videos of him. So I'm thinking of like Zillion when he was playing that mid, Veigar mid. He pretty much broke that champion. The ability to land that stun and then combo every single time. I've never seen someone land the stun that consistently as he could in solo queue. So you can see what I mean. This guy is not just a god, but then the breadth of he's got the highest talent level, like the most vertical skill, but then also the breadth, the sheer depth, the depth of his pool of mastery and ability and overall abilities is absolutely unreal as well. So let's talk about that. What other qualities make him so great? As well as incredible skill, champions he can play on, understanding of matchups. Well, how about the fact that he is the ultimate impact player? Now, it's true to a degree, like I won't say overall, that the mid lane in general has been able to abuse and have more impact on the game than any other role in League of Legends history. Like you look for all-time great teams, they've all got at least a good, if not an all-time great mid laner. Now, admittedly, you do have names like Wei Xiao, Mata, who can be at other roles and Dandy and be gods from those roles and have an incredible impact. But he's not only playing the best role to have an impact, he's the best player in that role. And then in terms of the sheer impact he can have in the game, he's the best. So, okay, as a mid laner, he's the best mid laner ever. And he plays mid lane, so that allows him to have the most impact. But then on top of that, he's also having the most impact because he's an aggressive mid laner who is a playmaker both 1v1 and then in team situations where he can cause those as well. So he's causing the most possible pressure, impact, exerting himself, asserting himself on the game more than any other player is able to or can or even would imagine to be able to. He's a player who forces target and respect bans. During a period of time where LeBlanc was not OP because she had all those changes done to her, like taking off the silence off the queue, people still regularly had to ban LeBlanc against Faker in 2015 when they would leave it up for other champions. Like Febiven can play LeBlanc, it's okay. You can let Pawn play LeBlanc sometimes. They won't always beat you if it means you can get other things with your bans and get that away from them. So it's not an automatic ban against everyone else. It's an automatic ban against Faker because you saw those like 2 or 3 times that people let him play it during the regular season this in 2015 and didn't ban it. He picked it and destroyed people with it. Utterly insane ability to just outplay everyone and absolutely crush people with it. Got a penta on it in like the first game of the season against Najin. So he forces target and respect bans. Then you add in other stuff like his Zed in the past, his Riven. These things mean that every single game during these different periods, his team's automatically essentially got a 1-ban advantage against the opponent. And they can choose what to ban there. And that also means that there's 1 less ban going against his other carries. So players like Piglet, obviously, when Piglet was a very good AD carry, but he's playing with 1 less potential ban against him than his peers like Imp and like... well, obviously, like Uzi and Wei Xiao, oh, well, not Wei Xiao, I guess, for Piglet overall, probably Name at that period in time. He's getting an advantage because of Faker's existence and presence on the map in the game. So that's huge. He draws attention constantly within the game, both from the team. The enemy jungler is going to constantly be trying to help the mid laner so that he doesn't 1v1 him. The team in general is going to be diving Faker and trying to take him, constantly drawing attention in fights, allowing someone like Piglet to clean up completely. He's a guy where he's drawing attention constantly from the other mid laner. So in terms of the team aspect, he's freeing up other lanes. He's making their life easier. He's making their life easier in fights. They can get more of their abilities off. Everyone's wasting all their abilities on Faker to try and kill him quickly and focus him down. Then you've got the Faker effect, which is where he fucks up opposing mid laners just by his presence. Like the fact that he's so ruthless and has no hesitation when he thinks an opportunity is available, he'll go in and he'll get the kill and he'll do this incredible outplay, means that people have to play even more safe against him. They have to constantly be worried, and he can feint at them that he's going to do this, and so they have to be even more worried and back off, or he can make them have to call their jungler to the mid lane, which frees up his jungler and frees up other lanes to not be getting ganked. It's like... to give you a comparison, it's like in the NBA when you're playing against a player like a really sick point guard like Chris Paul, or in the back, if you back in the day when you're playing against Allen Iverson, because their ball handling skills and their speed and agility is so insane off both handles and both directions, you always had to be worried, and other defenders were always worried, like this guy could like cross me up and break my ankles and make me fall over, and not only is he going to beat me and get a play off it, but he's going to make me look like a fool. And so people had to play those guys even more off them, and they had to play with even more space to hope that they could predict which way they're going to go. They had to give them even more respect. They weren't able to just body up against them and play really aggressively and force mistakes. You couldn't do it because you knew if you did that, like if you tried to make plays on Faker, the outplay he does against you is going to utterly crush your morale and maybe turn the whole game and snowball him when you thought you had the advantage. There's very few players, Pawn being an obvious example, who've been able to get away with making those plays and being aggressive onto Faker. He is the hardest carry it is possible to have in League of Legends. If he snowballs, he can snowball and close the game like almost no other player can, even if every other lane's losing. If he's behind in lane, he can still find a way to be dangerous later in the game and still turn a fight around if he gets the right opportunities. We remember the famous game against KT Bullets. I think it was game 3, or was it game 2? I think it was game 3, where he was on Riven and they were gonna lose, and he just hard carries the whole fight and wins the whole game for them. So playing ahead, playing even, playing behind, he's the hardest possible carry you could imagine. On top of that, he's the primary carry of the best team ever. Now, people remember, you probably have all forgotten this, but during the Season 3 Worlds time, because Piglet had a very good Worlds and was very good against a lot of the players he played against, people actually at the time were saying, oh, don't keep saying it's just Faker on SK Telecom, like Piglet's just as good as him. In fact, sometimes Piglet's the hard carry. Yeah, but you add in all these factors I've said, the respect bans, the focus that goes into Faker, the fact that he was playing Assassins at the time, so you had to try and focus him while Piglet was more free to fight in that sense. All these aspects added together allowed Piglet, who was at the time was a contender for best AD carry in the world, certainly, a lot more luxuries and freedoms than any other great AD carry at the time. So you can't really debate it. The real primary hard carry of all the SK Telecom lineups Faker's been a part of was Faker. Faker's consistent level of performance has never been matched in history. Name had a very long period where he was exceptional. Wei Xiao was very, very good for a long while. Froggen had a really solid period from Season 2, and then Season 4, it's not really worth discussing as much, but very solid as well through Season 4. But none of them are at their max peak level for as long. And then even when Faker had the 2014 period where it dropped off, he's now back to that level, and he's up there again. So he's reached his peak. He's had 2 peaks in his career that have both lasted very long. And even the slump period, the bad period, he was still a very good player. He was still one of the best players in the world, a contender for best player still, and he was still having a great impact on the game, even in a meta which didn't suit him as well, like the Ziggs meta, just more of the farm-oriented champions. He couldn't just hard carry as much. He needed his team to be there with him, and that's when the rest of his team, nearly all of them, were dropping off or were exposed for their weaknesses, which previously been covered by the brilliance of how SK Telecom operated. And their style being the prevailing meta, in fact setting the meta of how those pick comps could be played. So even during that period, he was very consistent, still exceptional. No one's ever been that good, even in their slump period. Now, at the peak level, no one's ever been that good and for that long. Both factors, that good and for that long. And he's still incredible now. It's not an exaggeration. I mean, admittedly, in the last season, he did have a couple of bad games, and every time he's thrown in those Lulu and Xerath games, he's had more bad games overall. And I haven't run the numbers, so I couldn't say this for a fact, but I used to say before last split, as a way of emphasizing to people from outside of League of Legends just how incredible Faker was, I said to them, okay, even the gods of the other positions, Wei Xiao, Flame, Froggen, Diamond Prox, Dade, whoever you want to pick, they've all had periods where they had a bunch of bad games, or they had specific bad games that stick in your mind. It's no exaggeration, despite what the most aggressive playing style, the most hard, impact, focused carry style that Faker has, despite that should lead to plenty of bad games. But actually, it's no exaggeration that at least before this last split, you could actually count every truly bad game from Faker individually on 2 hands, as in there were less than 10 in history. Despite all those games played, he really had less than 10 games in history where he played badly individually and was part of the reason why they lost the game and didn't play up to their level expected of him. That's how exceptional he was, because he could always find a way to get something out of the game, to contribute something in the game. Even his everyday level, his B, C, and D game is exceptional and has nearly always been exceptional. In the same sense, he's a guy who's almost impossible to tilt. Like, okay, against Pawn, I've seen a few games where he seemed like he tilted, like the regionals last year, obviously the WCG qualifier the first time they met. There have been times occasionally he looked like he tilted a bit, because that player specifically is his kryptonite. But other than that, in general, he doesn't tilt. Like, what's insane is under pressure, he's the best player ever in League of Legends history in that sense as well. His ability to do those comebacks like against KT Bullets and to hard carry the team out of situations, to be down in lane and still find a way to win the team fights. The problem with Faker is he's so good that he's set the expectation for what a great player like him should be able to do so high that first of all, no one else can match it for the periods of time he is. But actually, we now, as bizarrely, do take it for granted. Like, think about this. Even if you are a god, even if you are the best player at your time in some sense, it doesn't mean that you have to be also a god under clutch. In fact, what's funny is in a lot of sports, there are great clutch players who aren't that great otherwise as players. Like, no one's going to call Paul Pierce in basketball the best player of his generation, but a very, very clutch player, yes. A very good player and a very clutch player as well. Meanwhile, someone like an obvious one, be LeBron, he had periods of times where he had some difficulties in the clutch. Not always, he was a not underrated clutch player, but he had difficulties. His overall game was impossibly good. MVP all those seasons in a row, was definitely the best player, best all-around player. But this one area, he had mild problems in, and so you had a player who could help him in that sense. Think of Peyton Manning, one of the best individual NFL players of all time, but he had some certain issues in the clutch in playoff scenarios. Again, slightly overrated because his team sometimes let him down. But again, he couldn't always rise up to the expectations that his own career had set for him. Sidney Crosby, incredible all-round player, fantastic skills in all senses, very high skill level, intelligence for the game, sometimes doesn't show up in playoff games. Alex Ovechkin, another hockey player, one of the best scorers in hockey history, absolutely phenomenal ability to score, and yet sometimes he has his issues in the playoffs. He has his issues when the other team is falling away and he has to solo carry and be the guy who scores that one goal. He can't always do it, and that's why they've never been able to make it to like conference finals and stuff like that. My point I'm making is, we take it for granted that these godlike players should never feel fear. They should never have a game where they have an off game at the key time when they had to play well. The fact that Faker somehow nearly always has been able to is just above and beyond any other player. The fact that we have these expectations and we know it's Faker and we know he's going against this guy is very dangerous, and he still again and again prevails and manages to make these plays and somehow not crumble and never really have those games where he himself erodes his own confidence and his own ability to play, and he makes one or two bad mistakes that lead into more bad mistakes, anti-snowballs the game or snowballs the game in the opponent's favour. The fact that that nearly never happens is so underrated in Faker. It's just a quality that, like, it's already enough to be the best ever, to have the deepest champion pool, to be the best at 1v1, best at laning, the best at outplays, the best matchups, the best instinctual ability to make plays, the best ability to come from behind, and then after all of that, to be the best clutch player as well, and the best and most consistent performance level. You're starting to get a sense now, I hope, of why this guy is not just the best league player ever, he's one of the best esports players ever to play, and probably it's very unlikely when you think how many qualities I'm defining here that there will ever be a league player who can compare to this. Yes, there could be a player who's the best, there could be a player maybe who could even be as good skill wise, but would they be as good as in the clutch? Would they have as deep a champion pool? Would they be able to hard carry to the same extent? Would they be able to play from behind the same way? Would they have the same in-game intelligence for how to make plays, how to make out plays, how to respond to scenarios? Would they be the same impact player in terms of drawing certain bans and being able to be aggressive and playmaking all forms of the game? Probably not. That's why, truly, Faker has no rivals. Pawn is only his rival in as much as when they play each other, Pawn can get the better of him. But Pawn against the rest of the field, the other great mid laners in the world, is not as good as Faker is. No one truly, at mid lane or as a LoL player, is Faker's rival. The only rivals he really has are the other godlike, gifted, golden children, the one-offs in the other games, like the Flashes, the Cyphers, the Neos. Maybe they're his peers, but that's the only real peer group you can form. No one from League of Legends can even get into the conversation with him. And so it's almost unfair to some of these other players, because players like Name and Dade and Dandy and Mata should have had their time of being not only the best player, but also contending for maybe I'm the best player ever when I'm at my peak, like Dandy at the end of Season 4 Worlds. But because Faker came along in summer of Season 3, ever since then, no one ever really could be the greatest player ever. He'd taken that spot and then he's kept it and pushed it higher and higher and constantly maintained that level, that it's just there's too many areas, the consistency, the skill level, the talents, the champion pool, the ability to rise up again and again, to come from behind, to make plays, to be the best snowball, the best carry, the most respect. Every aspect is just too much. No one can... These other players are gods, but they're still human. In a sense, he's a god in almost the literal sense. Like, there's just something that beggars belief about how phenomenal and superlative this guy's players. And so I hope I've outlined not only what makes him great as a league player, but just what makes him special in almost every regard. Such a unique player, and you will never see a player like this again ever in League of Legends. Whether he drops off and doesn't become as good, there will never be a player who is as good in all these areas for as long, for as often, and with this much impact on the game.